The show was almost a Netflix series. The streaming giant entered a bidding war with Amazon Studios, who eventually won and acquired the rights for $250 million. In this video, we are going to talk about 13 interesting facts about the Lord of the Ring, the Rings of Power. But now let's jump into the video. Sauron tricks the elves in the form of Annatar. Sauron's role as Morgoth's devoted lieutenant during the First Age is not forgotten by the elves, which is why he initially tries to obtain allegiance from men. However, he soon realizes that the only real way to create and hold on to power would be to ally with the elves, even temporarily. Sauron, therefore, manifests a fictional entity known as Annatar in the Second Age, a time which will be the setting of the Rings of Power, managing to eke out a welcome from most elven lands. While Galadriel, Gil-galad, and Elrond have their suspicions about his real identity, they are unable to prove it. There are lesser rings of power. Including the One Ring, there are 20 great rings of power in total. However, rumors exist of so-called other lesser rings being crafted, although neither their number nor their natures are known, nor do they ever physically appear in Lord of the Rings. Historical record shows that these rings did not bear gemstones or decorative motifs, suggesting that they were basically a means to practice a newly learned craft without wasting time and resources developing a failed great ring. While these items largely remain a mystery in the franchise, the title of Rings of Power could suggest that the truth about the lesser rings could finally be brought to light. The lesser rings may still have power. While very little is known about the so-called lesser rings, one startling observation seems to suggest that their story may not have been told just yet. Because these rings' power is not tied to the One Ring, it is possible that they were not rendered useless by its destruction at the end of the Third Age. If these rings truly do retain power following the destruction of the One Ring, they may still have a part to play in the story of Middle-earth. With the greater rings of power now nothing more than jewelry, the lesser rings may find a greater importance in the Lord of the Rings than ever initially suspected. All but the One Ring are produced in a region. A region, ruled by Celebrimbor, is a peaceful Noldor realm before the appearance of Annatar, as evidenced by their friendly relationship between the elves and the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. Unfortunately, Sauron's true motives remain hidden to the inhabitants of a region. Being the Gwaith-y Myrdain, they are more than happy to assist him in forging the Rings of Power. It is claimed that their smithing skills surpass almost anything made by the elves, which is probably why Sauron befriends them in the first place. As such, Celebrimbor oversees the creation of all but the One Ring, which is manufactured in Mordor. The Elven rings are untainted by Sauron's will. Celebrimbor forges the Elven rings without Sauron's knowledge or influence, although it must be noted that they still technically fall within the ambit of the One Ring. The three rings are not capable of granting invisibility, but their innate healing powers allow wielders to regenerate and safeguard their dominions. In fact, it is stated that Nenya and Vilya, the rings that belong to Galadriel and Elrond respectively in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, are partly responsible for the peace in Rivendell and Lothlorien. The ring belonging to Gandalf encourages and inspires those oppressed by Sauron. Sauron wages war on the elves for total control of the rings. When Sauron wears the One Ring, it instantly reveals his darkness to the elves, unraveling his carefully constructed schemes for domination. He concludes that brute force is the only option left to him, triggering what is known as the War of the Elves and Sauron. Elrond and Gil-galad bring their respective armies to protect Eregion from the legions of orcs swarming out of Mordor, but the Elven kingdom is inevitably destroyed. Sauron tortures Celebrimbor, forcing him to surrender the 9 and 7 rings, but thankfully fails to learn anything about the 3. The One Ring has some major limitations. Since the One Ring contains only Sauron's will, it is basically a shiny reflection of his evil soul. He uses it to great effect, manipulating the rulers of Numenor into committing unforgivable atrocities, such as attempting to besiege Valinor. However, this great ring of power is nothing more than a worthless piece of jewelry to people like Tom Bombadil, meaning that the One Ring is not omnipotent, not by a long shot. More importantly, any of the Valar could probably crush it between their thumb and forefinger if they tried. The correlation with the Silmarils. The Silmarils of Fëanor are the most important artifacts to ever exist, resulting in considerable death and destruction across the world. In the end, one of them is taken by Arundel on his flying ship, while the other two fall into a fiery abyss and the ocean, respectively. Vilya, Nerya, and Nenya, the Elven Rings of Power, are based on air, fire, and water, signifying a vaguely thematic resemblance with the fate that Mandos declares for the Silmarils, that they would be lost to the elements of Arda, created in sets. While most Lauder fans know that the Rings of Power were separated into different groups and distributed among the men, elves, and dwarves, not everyone realizes that the rings were specifically created in sets, each for their respective owners. Thereby, all the rings that were eventually passed on to the 9 kings of men were created together, with the 7 rings of the dwarves being created separately and specifically. The Elven rings, however, were created entirely separate so that they would not come under the sway of Sauron and the One Ring to rule them all. The bloody history of the 7 dwarf rings. Little is clear about the 7 rings, mainly because the dwarves are extremely private beings and rarely interact with those outside their clan, let alone their race. Sauron doles them out to 7 important dwarf lords, hoping to bring them under his control, but things turn out quite differently. The rings don't affect them per se, but play a vital role in increasing the fabled dwarven hordes, which inevitably leads to internal warfare. 2 of the 7 are eventually uncovered by Sauron, 4 are consumed by dragons, and the final one is kept with Thrain II until his capture and incarceration in Dol Guldur. The nature and location of the 9 rings remain a mystery. The 9 rings work exactly as intended. Each man who receives one is completely taken over, body and soul, by Sauron. The rings transform these once human kings into ghoulish specters of their former selves, tormented ghosts called the Ring Wraiths. Interestingly, Tolkien wrote that the 9 the Nazgul keep, but Frodo clearly notes that they are devoid of rings when they attack him on Aemon Sul. This could either be an editorial oversight or mean that Sauron has the 9 in his personal possession. However, with the Rings of Power delving deeper into these mysteries, it may finally be revealed exactly what the fate of the 9 may be. The Rings of Power possess a basic level of sentience. In the wise words of Gandalf the Grey, the Rings of Power are equipped to look after themselves, explaining how the One Ring transfers itself from Isildur to Gollum to Bilbo, piggybacking on anyone it believes to be a suitable ring-bearer or host. It takes every possible effort it can to survive, while simultaneously distressing the wearer, a paradox of malice that mirrors its creator's deepest desires. This feature of SemiSentience is also present in the remaining rings, although to a far lesser degree than the one. Extra connection to Tolkien. Every fan of The Lord of the Rings is familiar with its prolific creator and author, J.R.R. Tolkien. However, many fans may not be familiar with Tolkien's strange and completely coincidental connection to the Rings of Power in his magnum opus. Tolkien died in 1973, a year that has great significance to those learning about the Rings of Power. Each number in Tolkien's year of death corresponds to one set among the rings. 1 ring to rule them all, 9 for the kings of men, 7 for the dwarf lords, and 3 for the elves. While a coincidence, this connection is a strange and interesting addition to the lore of the Lord of the Rings fandom. So guys, this is the video. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you want to see more videos like this, then make sure to subscribe our channel and also like this video.